I'm very pleased to welcome you to this discussion of the historic preservation of a relic, the Mother Cabrini Shrine in Lincoln Park. As many of you may know, Mother Cabrini spent the last 15 years of her life in Chicago, and she was instrumental, actually foundational, to starting Columbus Hospital, which is very much part of the memorial site. I'm very excited because I'm currently teaching Chicago architecture. Nice to see the students here. And this is a great opportunity for us to hear both the historical view and the architectural view of what can be done in thinking about social issues, ethnic issues, religious issues, and of course architectural issues altogether. That is the complexity of architecture, and really will come forward here. So I'm very, very excited about that. We have three presenters today, and then we'll open up to the audience. The presenters go one after the other, so they'll give you three different snapshots of the project, and then we'll have our discussion and then reception afterwards. So without further ado, I'll start by introducing our first presenter, who is Ellen Skerrett. Ellen is an historian of Chicago and its neighborhoods, is a researcher for the Jane Addams Papers Project in its third volume, affiliated with Duke University. Ellen wrote what I knew her most prominently from, the first published history of Loyola University. Now, we don't like that, but nevertheless, it's a great book called Born in Chicago, A History of Chicago's Jesuit University. And she's also been the co-author of Catholicism, Chicago Style, among many other publications. She was the primary scholar as well as the primary scholar advisor for a Catholic Chicago exhibition that some of you may have seen, this great exhibition at the Chicago History Museum that ran in 2008 and 2009. Ellen will be followed by Mark Sullivan. Mark is a partner and founding member of Sullivan, Goulette, and Wilson, or SGW, an architectural and urban design firm that he founded since 1994. He's designed many mixed-use retail residential projects, some of which we were just discussing. It's quite an interesting range of projects. Office interiors and master planning projects in Chicago and throughout the country. Mark has been awarded numerous accolades from his professional peers, including, among many others, the Association of Licensed Architects and the City of Chicago Office of the Mayor. He graduated with a BA in architecture, or Bachelor of Architecture degree, in design from the University of Illinois at Chicago in 1985. And apparently on top of this, he's also an avid golfer. So there we go. We'll golf someday. And our final presenter will be Chris Payne. Chris is an Illinois-based licensed architect who's worked in the profession for over 18 years and currently is working as a project architect for SGW. He received his Master of Architecture degree from the University of Buffalo. In addition to his work on the Cabrini Chapel, he has worked on a variety of building types and sizes, including projects for the CHA Plan for Transformation and a number of multifamily residential buildings and planned developments in Chicago and neighboring communities. He's very much interested in LEED architecture, that is, in sustainable architectural issues. And Chris is also, not surprisingly, based on this project, a very strong advocate for historic preservation. And among other projects, I'm very happy to see that he has lectured and published his research on a turn-of-the-century architect, Joseph Lyman Silsby, who's one of the great understudied Chicago architects, in my humble opinion. So without further ado, I turn it over to Ellen. Please join me in welcoming our panel.
The reopening of the National Shrine of Francis Xavier Cabrini provides a unique opportunity to reconsider the life and mission of the extraordinary woman who in 1946 became the first United States citizen canonized a saint. What could be more fitting during World Catholicism Week at DePaul than to explore the Chicago dimension of Mother Cabrini's work and her rapid, very rapid rise to sainthood. For Catholics of a certain age, this iconic photo of Mother Cabrini was a familiar image, occupying a place of honor in family homes throughout the United States, often next to Pope John XXIII and President John F. Kennedy. But if Cabrini had had her way, the photo wouldn't exist. In 1905, she wrote that due to the insistence of the doctors, I could not escape having my picture taken for the grand opening of Columbus Hospital. Like so many other women religious living and working in Chicago, Mother Cabrini avoided cameras as inconsistent with the spiritual nature of her mission. Happily, Chicago photographer August Duderstadt convinced her to sit for a formal portrait. Not surprisingly, the camera-shy Cabrini expressed her hope that this is the last one I take during my lifetime. While understandable from the viewpoint of religious life, one of the unintended consequences is that until her beatification, she was rendered invisible in the historical record. Creating Catholic institutions in 19th century Chicago was never easy. When the Vincentians began organizing St. Vincent de Paul Parish in 1876, the surrounding area was mostly prairie. But by 1895, the French Romanesque church on Webster Avenue, visible in the distance, had become a landmark in the Lincoln Park neighborhood, evidence that Catholics were investing in their future. Yet another sign of progress was the construction of the elevated road depicted here, which would ensure a steady stream of students to the university set to open in 1898. This is what DePaul looked like at the time Mother Cabrini began her work in Chicago. In typical Catholic fashion, the original parish building directly west of the church was enlarged with a third floor and converted into classrooms. Here is a rare photo of Mother Cabrini and her sisters taken in New York City shortly after their arrival in June 1889. Born in 1850 in a small village about 20 miles from Milan, Maria Francesca Cabrini was the daughter of a relatively prosperous farmer. At a time when few women continued their education in Europe or America, Cabrini was an experienced, credentialed teacher, something rarely mentioned in news accounts of her institutions. While many know that she stood only 5 feet tall, Catholics are often surprised to learn that she had blonde hair and blue eyes. Reflecting stereotypes of the day, in 1889, the New York Sun characterized Mother Cabrini and the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart as dark-featured women wearing peculiar veils who ventured without hesitation to visit skyscraping tenements in which hundreds of families are huddled together. As this map, prepared in 1929 in connection with efforts to beatify Mother Cabrini, attests, she was an international traveler whose journeys had taken her from Europe to North and South America, often, as the Italian phrase puts it, by mule and on foot. In the United States alone, she established orphanages, schools, and hospitals in major American cities, including New York, Newark, Scranton, Chicago, New Orleans, Denver, Seattle, and Los Angeles. Cabrini's letters are filled with astute observations about the challenges facing the tidal wave of European immigrants seeking a new life in America. During her second trip to New York in 1890, for example, she lamented that there was no priest aboard to say Mass for the 700 Italians traveling third class. Cabrini's letters are also filled with appreciation for her friendship with Pope Leo XIII. In 1888, she informed the Pope that she and her sisters endeavored to grow in personal holiness and promote the glory of God in every part of the world, excluding no class of people, no corner of the earth, even the most distant, the most uncivilized. Depicted here is the Pope encouraging Cabrini to go west, not east, to care for fellow Italians living in the most deplorable ignorance of the faith. This is what Assumption School, the first foundation of the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart in our city, looked like in 1899. In a letter published in the New World at the time, Mother Cabrini made it clear that while her sisters were closely identified with Italians, they welcome all nationalities and are prepared to speak to each of them in their own tongue. The substantial brick structure, designed by Treat and Foltz, was the first Italian Catholic parochial school in Chicago, and it compared favorably with Catholic and public schools alike. Paradoxically, women religious such as Mother Cabrini were familiar figures in Chicago neighborhoods, but remained largely invisible in press coverage of the day. Here, by contrast, is the Chicago Tribune headline from May 19, 1890, praising two women's work in opening the social settlement on the city's west side. The idea that middle-class Protestant women would choose to live among immigrants in a poor neighborhood captured the imagination of newspaper publishers and journals. However, at the time that Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr, pictured here wearing simple black dresses, settled on Halsted Street, nearly 100 Catholic sisters already lived and worked in the neighborhood. mostly as teachers of the children of Irish and German immigrants. Indeed, one of the stories Jane Addams told about herself was being mistaken for a nun while riding a streetcar. While there is no disputing the fact that the Hull House settlement became internationally famous as its programs and its complex expanded between 1889 and 1906, women religious such as Mother Cabrini were no strangers to the challenges involved in creating and financing institutions. They were, after all, members of transnational orders who dedicated their lives to serving the poor in body and in spirit. This colorful image of Columbus Hospital at Deming Place and Lakeview Avenue gives no hint to the difficulties Mother Cabrini encountered when she purchased the North Shore Hotel for $120,000 in 1903. The spacious sanitarium, designed by John Willicott, had been a showplace along the lakefront when it was constructed in 1890, but it had fallen into disrepair. Describing it as the ruins of Jerusalem, Cabrini successfully negotiated with lawyers and supervised tradesmen to complete the renovation in 8 months' time. Along the way, she had to overcome the objection of neighbors to a hospital in their upscale Lincoln Park neighborhood and to quell dissent from Italian doctors outraged that she had chosen Dr. John B. Murphy, an acclaimed surgeon, as president of the medical staff. Among the stories cherished by Cabrini's colleagues was her insistence on measuring a parcel of land at 5 o'clock in the morning to make sure she wasn't being cheated. When dedication day for Columbus Hospital finally arrived, all was in readiness, from the most modern equipment in the operating room to the statue of the Sacred Heart donated by the DePaul Company. In his dedication speech, Archbishop James E. Quigley recalled that when Pope Leo XIII gave me an audience, one of the first things he did was to ask me if I knew Mother Cabrini. On October 18, 1909, at the age of 59, Francis Xavier Cabrini became a naturalized citizen of the United States, renouncing absolutely and forever all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign princes, potentates, state, or sovereignty, particularly Victor Emmanuel III, King of Italy. Life in turn-of-the-century Chicago remained precarious for immigrants, especially Italians and Jews, living near the city's open-air markets along Jefferson and Maxwell Streets. In addition to high infant mortality rates, the neighborhood just south of Little Italy's Taylor Street recorded the highest number of tuberculosis cases in the city. Although the need for a second hospital was great, Mother Cabrini soon found herself embroiled in controversy when she purchased the childhood home of Dr. Andrew Garvey, a staff physician at Columbus Hospital. When the neighbors learned that the Garvey home on Lytle Street and 2 adjoining structures would soon welcome, without distinction, the sick poor who lived nearby in the Italian, Bohemian, Jewish, Greek, and Slovak slums, they tried to sabotage Mother Cabrini's plans. As one of her colleagues recalled, firemen from the local station phoned one bitterly cold night to say the water pipes had been cut and the Garvey house was flooded. After an attempted arson, Mother Cabrini decided that the sooner the hospital opened, the better. Although she could not be present for the dedication on July 16, 1911, the Chicago Record-Herald reported on the extensive renovation and commented favorably on the operating rooms equipped in thoroughly modern style. In addition, the newspaper pointed out the front windows overlook Vernon Park, and though Columbus Extension Hospital is near 3 streetcar lines, none are close enough to disturb the patients. In a few minutes, Chris Payne will discuss the room in which Francis Xavier Cabrini died in 1917 and the current plans for its reconstruction in the National Shrine. With its old oak desk and chair, this was very much a working bedroom, and if you look closely at her blotter, you'll see images of 2 of her patrons, the one on the right, Pope Pius X, and his successor, Benedict XV, visible at the left. As Mother Cabrini's colleagues recalled, she was tireless, and often in the evening she would write until a late hour. According to Sister Mary Louise Sullivan, Chicago became Mother Cabrini's central base of operations in the United States, and her death certificate on December 22, 1917 confirms that she died here at home in the city. Thousands of Chicagoans turned out to pay their respects as she lay in state in the chapel at Columbus Hospital. According to one account, each went away with a flower as a relic. So many wanted to touch her habit that the sisters cut up an old one into small pieces. At the conclusion of a Mass celebrated by Archbishop George Mundelein on December 26, 1917, a large cortege of automobiles accompanied Frances Cabrini's coffin to the railroad station for the final journey to West Park, New York. Hailed by the Denver Catholic Register as one of the church's greatest women, tributes to Mother Cabrini poured in from newspapers and pulpits in Rome, Dublin, New York, New Orleans, Seattle, Los Angeles, and Scranton. Then on August 11, 1928, the campaign for her beatification began here in Chicago, as Cardinal Mundelein put out the call for writings of Mother Cabrini that would illuminate the virtue and sanctity of her life. It is no exaggeration to say that George Mundelein, the first American Cardinal of the West in 1924, put the Catholic Church in Chicago on the map. Thanks to his efforts, Chicago became the first diocese in the United States to host the 28th International Eucharistic Congress in 1926. The elaborate ceremonies held in Soldier Field, the city's newest venue, provided a much-needed respite from news reports of machine gun gangland slayings during Prohibition. Regarded as a Catholic Daniel Burnham, Cardinal Mundelein made no little plans for the growth and development of the institutional church, and he was unwavering in his belief that Mother Cabrini deserved beatification. Indeed, he claimed he was the last person to whom she spoke outside the nuns of her own community. In addition to the canonical depositions taken in Chicago in 1933, there were signs, literally, that Mother Cabrini's cause was advancing. In 1936, the City Council voted to rename Ewing Street on the west side in her honor. Visible in the distance is Our Lady of Pompeii Church, located just north of the hospital Cabrini founded in 1911. Not only was Cardinal Mundelein a confidant of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and an ardent supporter of his New Deal, but on May 23, 1937, Chicago's Archbishop achieved international notoriety for a speech in which he denounced Adolf Hitler as an Austrian paperhanger, and a poor one at that. While the beatification of Mother Cabrini on November 13, 1938 was cause for celebration, it bears repeating that it occurred at a time when the daily papers were filled with news of the Depression in America and horrific stories of the Nazi persecution of Jews in Germany. Little wonder then that the American press and international news services gave extensive coverage to the solemn event at St. Peter's Basilica, recounting Mother Cabrini's life and work and the two miracles attributed to her. Chicago's Archbishop, pictured here, was the first American cardinal to officiate at a beatification ceremony and the first to deliver a radio address from the Vatican. Indeed, the New York Times considered Mundelein's remarks so important that the newspaper published the entire text of his talk. Back at home in Columbus Hospital, nurses and sisters listened as Cardinal Mundelein described Mother Cabrini's apostolate to the poor as penetrating places where even the police were afraid to go. He also praised her for erecting fine institutions and paying for them, at the same time recruiting an army of 4,000 women under the banner of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Mundelein reminded his listeners that Frances Cabrini became an American citizen to further her work, to link her institutions more firmly to the country, to show Americans the opportunity for their children. Calling Mother Cabrini a national heroine for men and women alike, he admonished his listeners not to forget that peace has its heroes as well as war. Year by year, Mother Cabrini became a more familiar, beloved figure, and in 1942, the city of Chicago named the new public housing project at Chicago Avenue and Larrabee Streets in her honor. In the 1940s, WPA muralist Robert Smith depicted Frances Cabrini as the saint among the skyscrapers, recalling her deep commitment to the urban poor. In a speech treasured by the sisters on the 25th anniversary of her death in 1942 and published in the Mother Cabrini Messenger, Archbishop Samuel Stritch observed, "We often think of sanctity as being something that you find a way off in some distant country, but right here in the heart of this great metropolis, lived Mother Cabrini, here where the elevated trains with all their noise rushed past. Although Frances Cabrini's advancement toward canonization was among the fastest in modern times, because of World War II, the ceremony did not take place until 1946. A war-torn world embraced her as a sign of unity, and the celebration of America's first citizen saint continued in cities across the United States. Evoking the pageantry of the Eucharistic Congress of 1926, Chicago Catholics organized a holy hour in Soldier Field that drew a crowd of 120,000. A 42-foot-high painting of America's first saint dominated an altar constructed at the north end of the stadium. A highlight of the celebration was the Living Rosary formed by 200 young women from Chicago's Catholic high schools. And during benediction, the stadium echoed with the sound of voices singing O Salutaris Hostia, Tantum Ergo, and Holy God, we praise thy name. Interest in Frances Cabrini continued to grow in the years following her canonization, and in 1947, a full-length film produced by Clyde Elliott was screened in theaters across the nation. I'd like to conclude this brief historical overview with what did indeed become a groundbreaking event, the creation of the National Shrine of Frances Xavier Cabrini. Here to my mind is a classic example of women religious creating sacred space, putting their imprint on the urban landscape. As an historian of Chicago, I think the record is very clear that in building churches, Catholics also established a place for themselves in the city. Built with the nickels and dimes of the poor, these structures signaled faith and hope in the future. It is cause for great celebration that the beautiful Romanesque sanctuary, designed by Chicago architect Leonard Gliato, is now about to take on new life at a time when so many of the city's houses of worship have fallen to the wrecking ball. In reopening the National Shrine, the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart will continue to honor St. Cabrini's life and mission, which were deeply entwined with her devotion to the Blessed Sacrament and the Eucharist. Thank you.
That was interesting. See if I can follow this up. My name is Mark Sullivan. I'm the project architect on the project along with Chris Payne. And what we'd like to do today is talk a little bit about the background of how we got involved and what we're doing to the chapel. I'd also like to introduce a couple other people from our office who are here. Chris Michalak, Jennifer, Mark, and Dan. Everybody's worked on the project in our office. We're very excited to have this project, and if Ellen didn't tell you how special it is, it's just as special to us. So we're really excited to be working. How did we get involved with the project? Well, about 10 years ago, I was called by Greg Signar and Steve Ruff, the attorney and the business manager for the project, and they were going to sell Cabrini Hospital. And they are a business manager and an attorney. They didn't have a lot of experience with architecture. So they hired us to help them out with issues. They'd ask me questions about architecture. They asked me questions about what was going to be developed and could that happen, and what kinds of things should we look for, and what should we ask for. And I was happy to help, and I consulted them. Probably, I think the process took about 5 years, and I think everybody can probably still hear me. What I'd like to do is just show you what was there originally. We had the hospital and a parking garage which went all around the chapel, which was in the middle. So it was like a donut hole, and we were in the middle. And the only way that we had any exposure to the outside world, because you couldn't see it with the garage and the church, the hospital all around the chapel, was through a perpetual easement, which got from the front door of the chapel through the hospital and out to Lakeview and St. James. There you can see, you can't see the chapel at all. So that was somewhat interesting, and I stayed interested and tried to help Steve and Greg in working with the developers and telling them what they should ask for and how they should negotiate. And, an agreement was struck, and the developer went off about his business, hired another architect to design the 2550 project, which is a condominium high-rise. And It's an assemblage of 3 buildings, 1, 2, and 3, and they went through probably a 4-year approval process with the neighbors. So it took longer that the chapel was out of business, and it was entombed with scaffolding and protections, because we, as you can see here, we had a copper roof, and it was very valuable. We had a lot of artifacts in the chapel. So we worked with Greg and Steve again, and the developer, who, by the way, what a closed loop. This is such an amazing project. We're working with John Murphy, who's the great nephew of the initial founding doctor that Mother hired to run the hospital. So at every turn, there's something that we find out. DePrado is our historian and one of the consultants we're working with. So everywhere we go, we're running across people who have worked on this chapel or have some connection to the chapel, and it's absolutely fascinating. Okay, anyway, back to my story. So now we're going to have, we have the chapel that was entombed and protected while all this had gone on around, and that's taken about the last 10 years. Through that process, we always had the perpetual easement, which was about this much space right here. Originally, there was the chapel, then there was a little hallway, then there was another little mother's room, the shrine room over here. Well, through the process, and I told Greg and Steve this from the start, I said, you know, they're going to need your land to finish their project. They kind of knew that, and they kept that in their back pocket. And eventually, when the developer realized that and came to them, they came back and they started negotiating with them for more space. So we were able to not only get a very nice donation for the rebuilding of the chapel, but we were able to get more space. And you can see this is the space we've gained. What that enabled us to do was to create a better entry sequence into the chapel, create a more substantial shrine room, gift shop, you know, and everything that we need to create a national shrine and house it all under one roof. And we have some offices and meeting rooms. And we're calling this the narthex space. The best part about this space, which Chris will get into in a minute a little bit more, was the creation of this space and how it then related to all of this outside space, which we gained in the trade, I guess. So it's been very interesting for us. We were able to really utilize the space that was never there before, because this is the basement plan. In the basement of the chapel, they had a bunch of mechanical equipment that serviced the hospital. So we were never able to utilize and use this space. So with the hospital being gone, we were able to recapture the space, and we're going to be able to set up a very nice meeting room for larger group gatherings and missions. We've also included a little pantry so you can have coffee after a service. So it's really quite a flexible space, which we were able to gain. So we really think the development that we've created for the sisters will be one that will be able to take them to the next step in their mission and developing services for the neighborhood. And I think we're planning on musical exhibitions, and it's just a very exciting project and a very exciting time. Here you can see in a little bit larger detail how we were able to create that entry sequence into the chapel. And you know, the difficulty for us in doing that was, well, gee, we've got this 20-story high-rise on top of our easement. We've got very little exposure on the outside. How's anybody going to know we're here? Because while from the backside, if you're on Deming over here, you'll get a glimpse of the chapel. But how's anybody going to know we're here? Where are they going to go? How are they going to get to our front door? So for us, we created this access here. We've retained the doors that were on the chapel originally, and we said, well, that's a good place to start. Let's start with that, and we'll add on that, and we'll create some very nice bronze doors that, at least, if nothing else, will give us a street presence and a welcoming event for the people that are coming to the chapel. Okay, that's a good start, but still, the outside of the building was very plain for us, and we worked with the developer. We could do anything we wanted in the chapel. We pretty much were able to do anything we wanted in the narthex space, but when it got to the garden and the exterior, especially the exterior, we had to deal with Mr. Murphy and his group to gain approvals to change the outside of the building. The garden was pretty easy. The garden is sandwiched between the 20-story high-rise and a 4-story townhome on the west side, which I'll talk about at the end of the presentation. But what do we do on the outside to say, look, this is where we enter the building, this is appropriate for the Missionary Sisters, and it really calls praise and celebrates the entry. What we did was we drew from the architecture of the bigger building and scaled down a new entry that floats in front of the bigger building, right here. That will be a limestone entry, classically detailed. They'll have the name of the shrine up in its entablature. Then in the clamshell behind that, which is what the developer gave us, we're putting an illuminated crest of the Institute. So when people come by, they'll be able to see that. They'll always be shining brightly. You can see the doors, which replicate the doors we have on the face of the chapel out front. So we think there's a very pedestrian, comfortable way to enter and celebrate the entry to the building. You can see our detail of the doors. These are bronze doors. We use a lot of the detailing that we already had within the chapel. We brought that out. We spent great hours this summer detailing those, and pretty soon we'll be able to see that all go in place. Okay, now I'd like to turn it over to Chris, who was really the main architect who worked. Once we had the space allocated for Mother's Room, Chris really worked long and hard in developing all of the pieces that go into the space and making sure it's historically correct and working well. Chris.
One of the primary missions of the sisters gave us as part of the design was that we're to use the building as a way to educate people about what the sisters did, who they were, who Mother Cabrini was, and also to create a series of spaces which lead people ultimately to the chapel and to the celebration of the Eucharist. And one of the first spaces that you would go into when you enter just off of here, and on the right is a series of galleries. And because Mother Cabrini died here, there are a lot of items from her bedroom, belongings that she left with us, that are all still held by the Missionary Sisters. And we, as part of this, are creating a series of galleries, for lack of a better term, to display those items. This part of the project is really a collaborative effort between Sullivan, Goulette, and Wilson, Ellen, who you've already heard from, and Bernanke and Associates, Diana Bernanke, and some other folks from Bernanke are here. So it's a historian, conservators, and architects working together to create these spaces. We divided the space into 4 distinct areas. One is an area which will be dedicated. There we go.
Just press the red button.
One is to, the first room is themed after the life and work of Mother Cabrini up until 1917, at the point where she died. So this will contain items that highlight where she was born, the kind of work that she did before she came to Chicago, as well as artifacts from her years in Chicago and establishing the hospitals here. The second and third spaces are linked. There's a large devotional space which will have a pew and a kneeler, which will look into a recreation of Mother's room. Mother Cabrini died in the original hospital building. There was a convent which was attached to it. She passed away there. Originally that room was preserved. Years later, when that building was demolished, another room was created.
And that used to be, as Mark noted earlier, attached to the side of the chapel. And so there'll be a recreation of that room here, holding the furniture and belongings of Mother Cabrini. And then finally, as you exit the space through another small room, which will highlight items that deal with the beatification and canonization. So there'll be photographs and artifacts that are related to that. And then you will ultimately leave out of the gallery space. There we go. Okay. There were display cases which were incorporated in the original chapel and shrine area. These are two of them. They used to be in a hallway which led from the shrine into Mother's room. Everything was a sort of two-dimensional experience. You would walk up and have everything in a case and you'd be kind of separated from it. The hope is that when we prepare exhibits for the new spaces, that some of them you'll be able to walk around, some of them you'll be able to bend over, so that you'll have a very different experience with the objects. Also, if you look here, everything is exhibited with the object and a sign. We're hoping to also make the new space a little richer with both imagery as well as more signage and description of the items, as well as a better display of the items. Here's a couple images of the recreated bedroom, or I call it the last incarnation of Mother Cabrini's bedroom. This one was demolished to make way for the new development. A lot of the original material in the room, and I'm talking woodwork, baseboards, doors, things like that, were taken from the original hospital and put in here. Those items could not be salvaged during the demolition because there was a lot of decay due to termite damage. So we have a couple pieces of the actual architecture, but all of the furniture that you see in the room was saved and preserved and is currently undergoing conservation work. But here again, you can see how your experience of the space, it was set up like a working bedroom, but you had glass cases covering different objects, which kind of obscured your view of things. Typical museum-like stanchions that separated you from the objects. And this is kind of a common thing, not only with Christian saint sites across the world, but also with Mother Cabrini in particular, because she traveled so much all over the world and worked in so many places. There are actually quite a few different sites which are devoted to her memory. The two pictured here are her birthplace and the site of where she founded the Missionary Sisters in Colonia, Italy. And as you can see, that a lot of the objects are put out so that people can see with images. So there's a kind of familiarity with how the objects are presented. That as pilgrims come to these types of places, this is what they might expect. And Mother Cabrini, because as I said, she had been all over the place. She had quite a few bedrooms. We have the bedroom furniture for the one she died in, but I think she slept more places than George Washington. We have on the upper left is a recreation of the bedroom that she had as a child. On the right is her bedroom at Colonia, Italy. On the bottom left is New Orleans, and on the bottom right is Denver. And here again, I think you see a kind of theme. This seems to be, the bedroom seems to be a very evocative image in all of these pilgrimage sites. I think one, because it's a place where you can gather the furniture and get an almost real life experience of how Mother Cabrini might have lived. I think also because it becomes a place, particularly in the bottom two images of New Orleans and Denver, with the addition of the desks, you get the impression, as Ellen was saying, that she was the kind of woman who was staying up all night writing. She used these as working rooms. So it gives you a very unique insight into her life. We don't really know, even though they did recreate this room in the shrine when it was was constructed. We don't really know what the room looked like when she died. We can make some guesses because we know some of the pieces of furniture were there. We do have images as well. On the far left is an image of what a typical hospital room would have been at Columbus Hospital. And you can see that it has Victorian furniture. Either it was brought in by guests or donated, or maybe even left over and purchased when the hotel was purchased by Mother Cabrini. On the right, you have an image of probably one of the earliest incarnations of Mother Cabrini's room after she was canonized. And you can see that quite a few things were added to the room. There's an altar, which was obviously not in the room when she lived there. The statue of the Sacred Heart on the corbel, which is another, I believe these were also provided by Donato. So the room, did look, quite a bit different at that period. And over time, it seems to have changed again and again and again. So this is one of the things that we were wrestling with, is an idea about how to organize the room, what items to keep in the room, what items are sacred, what items are items that were added afterwards. And that sort of weeding out process was in some ways easy, but there are still items that we're not quite sure if they actually were Mother Cabrini's. We can see over the years how the rooms changed, even to the point where they used to allow people to come in and sit on the furniture. And this is probably the best image we have of the last incarnation of the room, and I point to this because I think this is an image of, if anybody had ever visited the shrine before it was demolished, and an image that most of the sisters that I've met and priests that I've met who've experienced the shrine, this is the image that they really hold in their head. So there's a kind of collective memory about what the room actually was. And in some way, preserving this collective memory seems in some ways more important to the sisters than finding the most accurate portrayal of what the room was like when Mother Cabrini was there. Now looking even more closely at kind of a microscopic scale, there's a lot more, yes, when we look at the desk, you get a notion that Mother Cabrini had a working office there, but the objects, take on a very different connotation within Roman Catholicism because Mother Cabrini was canonized as a saint. So the objects that she touched actually become second-class relics. So they in and of themselves have a special place, not only because of their historical meaning, but also because of their spiritual nature. One of the things that we start to discover or are wrestling with now is, well, what kind of conservation gets done to these pieces of furniture? Some of the pieces of furniture are literally falling apart. So obviously we want things in such a way that they're not going to be damaged under their own weight or by moving. So those kinds of repairs need to be made. But if you look at this detail of the desk, other changes were made which are not so apparent. It was discovered by Bernanke that the desk had been overpainted with varnish, and it was a stained varnish. So what you're seeing now is not really the desk that Mother Cabrini had. It's got a covering of a finish over it. It's quite different. And another example, which is quite different than this, is the chair that Mother Cabrini died in. Whereas the desk might be something that we will do some work on, stripping, trying to get to a finish which is more appropriate to the era of Mother Cabrini. The chair that she died in has very little has been done to it over time. And what's remarkable is, even if you look at the edges of where she would have put her hands, that there's physical, deterioration of the wood where her hands would have been. So there's something very special about maintaining that in the final exhibit. And here is the proposal for the room. The experience is going to be behind glass, and we don't have all of Mother Cabrini's objects in this rendering, but the intent is to recreate one of the apartments from the hospital as close as we can with the picture rail and lighting and things like that we have, and also to set it up as a working bedroom. And carrying on this theme of trying to educate people about the Missionary Sisters and Mother Cabrini, the way that the space was laid out with a lot of ample wall space and a lot of niches. So when you come out of the gallery area, you'll come into this larger narthex area, and there's a whole series of niches which can have artwork in them. Two of them will also have video screens, so there are videos currently being done. One is going to depict the life of Mother Cabrini, and another one is going to depict stories about the mission. Another kind of element that we wanted to introduce, we wanted to make this kind of centered, something that centers you in that space. We have an oculus in the ceiling, which will eventually have a quote from Mother Cabrini written in it, so that again it becomes a point of education. And then on the floor we have the seal of the Missionary Sisters, all done in terrazzo. And here's another view of that space. And this one is looking up towards the doors to the chapel. And this is looking back through. One of the things that the sisters were very clear about, pun intended, was that they wanted visibility through the space, to have various levels of transparency, so that when you come through the space, things feel open. When you're looking through the first doors, that things are open all the way through. And I want to talk a little bit about the seal. This is, one of the many ways that we're trying to incorporate elements from the original chapel and from the heritage of the Missionary Sisters into the new space. Mark already noted the bronze doors out front, but this again is another kind of work of art which is going on the floor. It's about 6 feet tall, so this is not too far from full scale. And this is the seal of the Missionary Sisters. It has the Sacred Heart in the middle, with the flames, which reflect the love of Jesus for humanity. The boats depict the missionaries, and then the Star of Mary shining light, guiding light. And here's some photos of it under construction. You can see the outlines all being done in brass, and it's really kind of an old world thing when you see stuff like this. You're not used to seeing this kind of craftsmanship on everyday building, so it's kind of a unique experience that we have to be able to work like this. And eventually that will get filled in with the color by numbers with a series of terrazzos. And we're currently also getting mock-ups done to figure out how they will fade the colors and make it look more painterly like a piece of art. And then finally, here again is the stairs and the proposed change. Right now the doors to the chapel have large bronze panels in that, and those would get removed and glass put in, so that when you're in the narthex space, you're always directed up to the chapel, again trying to point you to that celebration of the Eucharist that the Missionary Sisters so important. Okay. Mark, take it over.
Okay, you're going to get the real fun stuff. I'm going to talk more about the construction now. But one thing I did want to say, to just add what Chris was talking about, because we didn't know what was going to go outside the facility when we were designing it, because we hadn't gotten that far with the developer or anything yet, it was the sisters' intention to keep everything clear and open. So just having it clear and open would draw people in, because we didn't know if they would reject every one of our proposals, if they'd only want us to put a little plaque outside. We didn't know what to expect. So that was just another way to try to say, look, here we are, we're open for business, we have a new mission, we're back in the neighborhood. And to that end, as Chris mentioned, with the niches for the education, and we're going to have another little more intimate area with a statue of Mother Cabrini. But what we're doing with the new mission, and we've been working with the sisters, is to develop a whole new color scheme, if you will, kind of also a representation of a new mission that's going on in the space. And this is what you can see of the existing chapel before they started construction. And it's going to look totally different when we're finally done. We're going to introduce more color. We rebuilt. There are 4 vaults in the space. We've rebuilt the 4 vaults, so it'll have a smoother plaster finish. Everything will be clean. The baldaquinos will be repainted and refurbished. As Chris mentioned, there was some termite damage years ago. That's all thankfully taken care of and not there. But it's a rebirth of the mission, and it'll be a rebirth of the church as well. You can see up here, Chris mentioned we have the oculus in the narthex. That was a response to the top dome of the chapel, where there are different quotes in the top. We're taking that and trying to marry the new to the existing. That was the concept behind what we did out in the narthex. You can also see some of the detail in some of the side doors. We took this detail and put that out in the front bronze doors. So it wasn't that we just pulled things from outer space. We had some basis in which to draw from, so that the two are married. You can see this is work in progress. You can see there's a man up here. Dan and I were up there one day. It's about 50 feet up top, and they're rebuilding that entire dome. I won't go into why they're rebuilding it. They were going to repair it, but we found some things and we had to rebuild it, which is better anyway. It's going to be a nicer dome when it's all finished. So you can see on the interior of the chapel, we've got scaffolding everywhere. It's a little bit dusty right now. This is some of the scaffolding that went to protect the chapel as the high-rise was being, this is when the hospital was coming down, but they did this to protect it while the hospital was coming down and the new high-rise was going up. So they basically entombed it with scaffolding and building ramps to protect it from falling objects or, flying debris, because it's quite windy over there. You can see the protection around the chapel and some of the excavation for the new building. When we started this project about 10 years ago, let's go back to Greg Signar, the business manager. He said, we don't know how long this is going to take. They're going to entomb the thing. We better look at the chapel now and fix whatever we need to fix so that it's stable. The masonry's okay. The windows are in good shape. If there's any repairs to the roof, let's do it now because we're not going to be able to get in there. He was so right. And we undertook a big masonry and a copper roof repair 10 years ago. Well, when we took everything off, of course, there were more repairs that needed to be done, which we'll get into in a minute. But one of the things that I think, again, they've got great vision in that they said, look, we've got perpetual easement to maintain our building all the way around it. But you know what, when it's all done and all this nice stuff's in for the condo, it's going to be a little bit difficult for us to get in and do something as major as a copper roof replacement. So they asked us to work with them, and where they're architects, where they're consultants, where they're project managers, where they're construction managers. We're pretty much wearing a lot of hats and doing a lot of things. So they asked us to replace the roof, which we did. We had the original copper installer who did the work in the building, of course, 10 years ago, come out. We tore the roof off, and we put an entirely new copper roof on the building, which was quite a project, quite an undertaking. We got up on top. Again, this is probably 70 feet up in the air. These are the little windows way up at the top of the dome. We found things like cracked glass that we replaced. So it's a good thing we did it. Then we were having problems because it was built in 1956. We couldn't get the glass anymore. So, it just presented one issue after the next, which we worked through. Dan was instrumental in monitoring the whole roof replacement. You can see this is the copper starting to patina. It's kind of now a medium brown from the penny shining bright. You can see we've gotten all the scaffolding down from around the chapel. One of the last things I'm going to talk to you about today is a garden space that we were able to gain through that negotiations 10 years ago. And we're really excited about this garden space because we think it's a great accompaniment to a new mission, the new narthex, the educational aspects of the new mission, the chapel. We think it's really a fantastic addition that they're going to have. This is the garden here. Here's our chapel. The picture's taken standing on St. James looking in. We've got the 20-story high-rise over here, and we have a 4-story townhouse over here, which, again, created issues for us, but we think we've designed things in a way, which I'll talk about in a minute, that overcome those things and make it a very nice space. Through this process, being in Tune for 10 years and taking the hospital down, we learned that, again, I told you a little while ago that the basement was really not usable to us because we had all that mechanical equipment in there. Well, we had all that mechanical equipment in there because the mechanical room was up against our wall. And it was a steam plant at the time, and it was very moist, and it really didn't do the brick any good. So we're in the process now, as you can see, we're having to replace a lot of that brick at the base of the chapel. And again, Dan is out there almost on a daily basis to monitor the work. Okay, this is one of my favorite parts of the entire project. I love this garden space. That's the space we were looking at in a photo a little while ago. Here's the 20-story high-rise, and here's the 4-story townhome over here. Okay, again, we were faced with, well, how do you make this space an inviting space that it's a space that people are going to be in, and it's comfortable, and it's going to function for the sisters? Well, first of all, what we did was we had the narthex space, which has that gentle curve, which we think is a very warm and inviting feature to be in that space, and I think it's going to function very nicely. But on that axis, on the end of the curve, on an axis, we come out these doors and straight across we have a grotto, which will have a piece of artwork in, which will terminate your view, and again, hopefully be something interesting enough that it will want to draw you out into the garden space. Okay, well, what's going on in the garden space if we want to be in that? Well, we've got a very nice gate, which the larger development is providing us, which is nice. So we'll again have our crest on the entry, which is very nice. We'll have some heavy plantings, which will provide a little buffer from St. James and the hustle and bustle of the city into our sanctuary or our garden space. And what we did here was just be in the space that would feel very very open and naked, if you will, because you have the high rise on one side and the townhouse on the other side. So we've introduced 4 pergolas to further define this space, and it can bisect with this axis the space. So this, by introducing the pergola at a height, it'll kind of create a ceiling, if you will, along with plantings, and hopefully there'll be ivy growing up there at some point in time, through the years. And it'll create a really nice space which will feel a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more closed in. So we're really excited about that. Well, it gets a little bit better because, well, this being an axis here, we had another axis on the entry, and then that left this space in further into the project, which is even quieter and even more intimate, where we've created a little reflection space, which will have high hedges, some seating in there, and then another sculptural element with a water feature, so you'll be able to go back, quietly reflect while the water is running. And we think that's really going to be a great space in the back of the garden. You can see some of the renderings that we did to present to the sisters. This is standing at the doors of the narthex looking out at the grotto. We got raised planter beds. We got decorative pavers in the space just to give it a little bit more detail. You can see the pergola up on top, which will kind of create a lid or a ceiling for the space. Again, looking back, you can see the water feature and then the more private area further removed from St. James. And here we are out on St. James looking into the space. I think people and residents in the neighborhood will get a glimpse. I think we're not sure how they're going to use it, but it could be open during the day for people to come in and really enjoy the space. Or and the sisters can use it for their purposes, for education purposes, nice days to give a lecture and things out there. I really think it's a great addition and a great flexible space to have associated with the project. So thank you all for having us. That concludes our presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, absolutely, yes.
I didn't see any handicap accessibility.
The entire facility is handicapped accessible. From the street, you can come into the building at grade. Off on one side of the narthex is an elevator, which would bring you up those steps.
I was seeing all the steps, I'm sitting going, okay, yeah.
We took that into account, so you come up the step, you'd be able to come into the chapel, and then we have a special area designated for people that are in wheelchairs or where
Because I mean, I was seeing was like, I was sitting going, okay.
everything was done with the handicap in mind and an aging population. So we've redone the entire sound system so that it's a better sound system. The speakers, aren't up high; they're down by your ears. So we, Chris and Dan have worked very hard to make sure we've had all that integrated into the project.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could talk about one of the great classic issues of architecture in this, which is you have this incredibly important historical site. So you've got to be very reverent about the entire kind of every detail, the wood, whether it's termites or not. And at the same time, you're a modern architect, and you have to tear things down and make compromises all the time. And I'm thinking about Viollet-le-Duc, 19th century architect who tears down 3 arches of Vaseline, and the local Catholic administration goes ballistic. It's like, I wanted to do it. So could you talk about, if you don't mind, one of the tensions you had between the history versus the need to restore and recreate?
I think we really try to balance that quite nicely. Everything in the chapel we're restoring if we can. I mean, those barrel vaults we couldn't because we found asbestos and it was put up with cork, which we didn't anticipate. It was ready to fall in, so that we couldn't. But everything else we're trying to repair. We've got John. What's his name? I dropped blank. We've got Chris Body is our historical consultant. We've also got John DePrado. No, not John Benji. He's another architect. Well, we got another historical consultant that will be, working with the mosaics and working with the baldaquinos and working with the paint colors. So we've tried to bring in the expertise to work with those things that are the artifacts. Now, you heard me talk about the rebirth and the new mission. And that was something that we had kind of in the back of our mind, but we really didn't push that very hard. When we made our first presentation to the sisters and, unveiled a kind of a color scheme or what everything would look like, we got some looks and, a little bit of this and like, it's a little boring, isn't it? So, okay, well, let's see what we can do about that. So I think what we're doing now is we're introducing some colors, and Chris showed that really colorful medallion. We're picking up on colors in the medallion. We're using that to paint the walls, and the vaults and things are going to be like a powder sky blue, and we're using some stenciling in there. So I think we're doing things that are restoring the existing architecture, but we're also introducing maybe some new things to try to signify that it's a rebirth. And I don't think we're doing anything that's that dramatic that it's going to be so foreign. Yeah.
To follow on with that, so does the Archdiocese have a role in this project?
Boy, that's a good question. Yes.
And
the Mother
like,
General
with
came
the
from.
destruction of the materials, did you have to burn them with a priest? I don't
well,
know.
there's
the ritualistic.
There's two
aspect
issues.
of it.
There's the ecclesiastic issues with the relic and how all that was handled. And Steve Ruff, the attorney, they kind of all did that somewhat without us. They took care of the relic, and I think they moved it to Our Lady of Pompeii. Yes. So that was done pretty much without us. The Mother General came over from Rome a couple of times. We made a few presentations to her, and Sister Joan goes back twice a year, and we send her with photos and renderings and everything else so they can see what we're doing. early on, before we could ever get to the next step, we would have to go to Rome every time to get approval. And that just really proved to be, I mean, it took us 10 years to get to a plan. I mean, it was very slow. So Rome gave Sister Joan the authority to, you know, we trust you, come back and present things to us a couple of times a year, and we're good. So that's what's happened, and Sister Joan has pretty much handled the approvals with Rome and also the Archdiocese. I know that you know, Cardinal George has been updated numerous times on what's happening, and I think ultimately nothing can happen without his approvals, and Sister Joan has taken that under her wing.
I mean, under the detail, for instance, when you talk about the termite infested floorboards, was there some special handling to do with the disposal of this stuff?
I don't believe
Mother
so.
Again, that was done without us.
We
I don't know that
weren't involved
anything-
at that point, but I don't.
Yeah, I don't know that anything
so.
special was done with that.
And what is the significance of the copper cladding? I'm not an architectural person, but why was that possibly chosen at first, and why is that preserved? Is that a symbol of something? I'm neighbors, and I love that beautiful copper. It's already, as you said, I have a picture of this bright, shiny copper, beautiful, and now it's
But that
already.
lasts about a week.
Yeah, and now we see it's not going to be open until October, and by that time it'll be that.
Yeah, it won't be the nice turquoise that it was. I don't know that there's any significance other than it's a roof that lasts a very long time. And that was what the original architect had designed, so we just replaced in like kind. And we think we'll get at least another 100 years out of that roof. Yes?
I used to go to the chapel, before it was, all the work started, because I'm a neighbor also. And I'm wondering, when I will walk in, will I recognize the chapel? The indoor, I thought it was very nice before, and I'm wondering what will it look like.
Well, hopefully it'll be even nicer when you walk in again. What you'll probably recognize is we haven't changed the 4 doors into the chapel with the inscription on top. The doors are staying. We're refurbishing the doors, but we were asked to take, there's the cross on each one of the doors. We're taking those out, putting glass panels in, and we're taking then those bronze panels and we're reusing them with the statue. Remember the statue that used to be in that space? We're just relocating it, and we're setting up a side altar, and we'll use those bronze panels and the statue along with some of the niches off in the side area.
But the chapel proper, the art glass and the
Yeah.
murals, none of that's going to change. That
Yeah,
will
Chris
also-
Body is restoring the murals and some of the mosaics in the side areas.
I can't wait until it's done. I tell you the truth. Anybody who has lived in that neighborhood, this was hellish.
That wasn't us.
Was it the sister's decision to block off the room entirely? Because it used to be an open air doorway that you looked in onto the Mother Cabrini's.
Yeah, boy, we had a lot of discussion about that. And I think
there was a lot of concern about the security of the objects. That they had shown quite a bit of deterioration over time, and just the concern. I mean, they would find, people had come in and were asleep in the bed and things like that. And they wanted to try to eliminate any of those kinds of unfortunate.
Plus, we have that room temperature and humidity controlled, so it just created a more controllable environment for them. Yes, sir.
Following up on the community aspect, when the Columbus Hospital was still in operation, of course, people from the neighborhood would go to daily and Sunday Mass because those were celebrated by members of the hospital chaplaincy. Now that there's no hospital chaplaincy, will there be liturgies in the chapel, and how will they be arranged?
We have Father Ted, who was there before and went to St. Joe. He's coming back. Father Ted will be our pastor. I think we will have Mass on Sundays.
Yeah, they'll be
Daily?
right now 4 p.m. Saturdays and 10 a.m. Sundays. They're starting very slow, and let the new mission establish itself. But we definitely will have services. We're not a parish. We complement the local parishes. So St. Clement's, Father Ken and Father Shred and all the different pastors are very much in tune with what we're doing, and will be a complement to, the Catholic services. But yeah, there'll be Mass offered, and Father Ted is, of course, coming back, which is just wonderful. As a matter of fact, we're training docents right now. So if anyone wants to volunteer, Father Ted would love to have you join, and it's really very exciting.
Where will the sisters reside?
The sisters' residence will not change. They currently, I think, live on Deming,
Yeah.
and that will stay.
That stays.
Why was it called Columbus Hospital? Is that something that Mother Cabrini chose?
Yes.
And for the first,
Right, 1492?
Okay, Columbus, and of course, it's Italian.
They hired the first Irish surgeon.
But there's a Columbus Hospital in New York as well.
Speaking of Italian, was the school you showed, School of the Assumption, is that next to the present Church of the Assumption?
I don't think so. I think that
It's
building.
on Erie Street, and the church is on Illinois.
Yeah.
And
But they were connected to the same, no.
Yes.
No, they were.
They were.
They were part of the same parish, but between the time the church was built in 1884 and by 1899, the neighborhood had been built up. And that photograph appeared in the New World in 1899, so we know that it was brand new. And already you could see the factories kind of, the neighborhood was changing. Even then, the constant.
Yeah, the church on Illinois is still there. I think the building's still there on Erie too.
Yeah.
It's a condo building. It's still
A
there.
little detail that was very, I call it a nugget. Ah.
Perhaps one more question? Sure.
So I saw a sign that the chapel's opening in October, and it looks like there's still a lot of pounding going on with the townhouse and stuff.
You put us on, well, the
Is there anything you
townhouse
could do,
is,
like stand in front of it,
the one townhouse,
bulldozers?
the one townhouse on St. James will probably be under construction for the next 3 years. That's going to take quite a bit longer. As I'm sure you know, living in the neighborhood, they're bringing a lot of appliance and things into the big building. We met with the developer weekly. Well, at the height of it, it was maybe weekly, and then it went to monthly, and we've had a lot of dialogue with them, and they're looking to, I think, start moving people in later this spring.
June, I talked to them today.
Is what they said.
And the second one
Is
is
there
on
any concern of any, all the good work that you've done, is there concern about lots of crap, stuff
More
falling?
dust?
Yeah,
More dust coming in?
Damage.
I think by the time our final cleaning happens in mid-September, they're going to have that first garden of theirs at 2550. They're supposed to have that first garden done maybe the end of May. So that will be done. And then they again, I think, sold off the rights to all the townhouses on Deming. So another developer will be possibly finishing those off. But I think they will, they've got the foundations and everything in for that. And then I think they're going to fill in the rest of that garden. So, yeah, there'll still be some lingering construction, but really, and it was a big discussion point with us, after we had all the scaffolding there, but when could it come down? Well, the contractor didn't want to take it down. You'd think we had consultants. They've got, consultants from every place on the planet coming here. They didn't want us to take it down because they were afraid that any damage, obviously they're liable for it, but we knew that we had 6 months' work to replace the roof. And we wanted to get our work done, so it was a back and forth, and we came to some agreements, and they were able to take things down. We were able to start the roof and get it done. They were mostly concerned, because, as you know, they had the tower crane there. They're mostly concerned because a lot of stuff dropped. I don't know if anything of yours got damaged, but a ladder flew out of the building one day, and guys have dropped hammers and screwdrivers and all that kind of stuff. Not that I don't know anybody that got hurt, but that stuff happened. And they didn't want anything to damage the chapel. So after they had all the precast up, they felt comfortable enough in taking down the scaffolding so that we could start the roof replacement.
So you don't have much concern going forward then with all the heavy
No.
equipment causing more?
There's really, the one to our west end, St. James, that's probably the heaviest construction right now. They're taking out that whole second floor slab, and they put in vibration monitors in our basement. So really after that's done, I think really all the heavy work is pretty much done.
Again, thanks to Chris, Ellen, and Mark for a very interesting discussion, and please help me thank them as well as enjoy the discussion.